Hello everybody and welcome back to LMM, and if you're enjoying what you're seeing on the channel at the moment, how about giving this video a like and maybe subscribing to the channel to help us grow, and perhaps even check out our Patreon. Today I've returned to Wales at the home and the heart of preservation at the Talyllyn Railway. Now most of you will know that this was the first preserved railway to be operated by volunteers in the entirety of the world, and this place has an awful lot to answer for. Because if this place had failed in its early days, preservation certainly would have continued, but not in the form that we know now. Who knows, you might not be watching this video and I might not have bought many mistakes. So, why am I here today? Well, this is a very important day. For next year, the Preservation Society here at the Talyllyn Railway is 75 years old. And what is launching today is the start of the 75 Appeal, which is going to be preserving the past and building the future, looking at how the railway is going to be moving forward for the next 75 years and beyond.
And I had been invited for the press launch day. But before we could start with all of that, we went to Pendre to see the engines being prepared, and there was something very special happening inside the shed. Something that had not been seen by members of the public for a very long time indeed. Following a prolonged overhaul, there was an engine coming round into steam, which was none other than Talyllyn, the railway's #1, all back together again and ready to play its part in the day's proceedings. Now, the engine wasn't going to be hauling trains, but it was significant to have this little engine in attendance to help launch the day, and to see this little Fletcher Jennings being made ready in the same shed that it would have been 150 years ago was really the stuff of magic. And it wasn't just #1 being prepped. Both #2 and #3 were also getting ready to play their part in the day's proceedings. The atmosphere inside Pendre's shed when locomotives are being prepared is almost indescribable. You have the magic of locomotives coming back round into life, but these are literal legends of the preservation movement, the real pioneers, which gives the whole thing more gravitas. Although, to the volunteers, it was just a normal day and they were just going about their duties. And soon, #1 had enough steam to move under its own power. And this signified that it was time for us to move back down to wharf, ready for the day's festivities to start. By the time we de-rigged and managed to get ourselves back down to wharf, #1 had beaten us there.
This is #1, which is wearing this very fetching Great Eastern inspired blue for the first time ever, and there's a lot of naysaying when this came out, but it wears it so very well. Now, I don't actually remember the last time I saw this engine in steam. In fact, I don't even remember the last time I saw this engine in one piece. Certainly since I've been doing LMM and coming and visiting the railway, this thing has been under overhaul. So seeing it back together is a really exciting moment, and seeing the railway move forward with its #1 and have it back in one piece ready for this new adventure really summarises the whole event. And yes, I am absolutely itching to have a drive on it, because is it not just glorious? #1 and #2 at the Talyllyn are some of the oldest working steam locomotives on the narrow gauge in the entire country. And what I always love about these older machines is how contemporary they are, and we realise how little the steam engine actually evolved from the end of the 1800s into the 1900s and beyond, because that, when you look at it, could have basically been anything that was produced all the way up to the end of industrial narrow gauge steam. It just looks right, doesn't it? A very well-proportioned machine, but wonderful to see it back in action again.
Not long after I finished fawning over #1 and admiring its new paint in the sun, #3 turned up with our train. And no sooner than when it had arrived in the platform, we were ushered inside for a presentation on the 75 Appeal, which was opened by the legend that is Mr. Tim Dunn. There were a great number of local and railway people in attendance, with Charles and I being the only invited YouTubers, which was a real honour. And after several important members of the railway had had their chance to speak, a superb video made by my good buddy Luke was played to overview the 75 Appeal project.
Bryneglo Slate Quarry lies isolated high in the hills above the Afon Vathw Valley. In 1864, a group of Manchester investors, led by the McConnell family, took it over. They expanded the workforce and built houses for them in the nearby village of Abergynolwyn. To transport their newly won slate to markets across the globe, they built a railway. One of the first steam-operated narrow-gauge railways in the world. This railway was known as the Talyllyn. It opened for slate traffic in 1865 and started carrying passengers the following year. The railway originally had 2 steam locomotives, 4 passenger carriages and a brake van, all of which are still in service today.
Now, it's not my place to show off all of Luke's magnum opus here, so go check it out on the Talyllyn Railway's website, which is in the video description and also just up there now. Having watched the video, we were hurried back onto the train to go and see some of the sights that the 75 appeal would affect with our own eyes. And luckily, we were able to get into one of the carriages with Luke, so when he wasn't telling us all about the project, we could have a good natter and catch up.
A full kind of conservation plan to make sure the badgers aren't affected by any of the potential development works.
To help us get a better understanding of the plans, we'd been given this lovely booklet that had the drawings inside, and with Luke feeding us information about the project, we made our way on to Abergynolwyn, where there were some more talks and the unveiling of the Steam Railway Readers Award in 2023, which was unveiled by the Deputy Editor Tom Bright. This was awarded for the recreation of the long-demolished water stop on the railway, which frankly, having had a good look at it, does look amazing. There were also tributes paid to members of the railway for outstanding work and the launch of a new print, the profits of which would go towards the 75 appeal. After the presentation was finished, number 2 arrived complete with the vintage train, just how it would have looked when it and the railway were both brand new. We then had the option to either have lunch or hop on the vintage train and go for a ride up the rest of the line, so obviously I decided to hop on the train. En route, we stopped to look at one of the other projects that the railway was working on, which is the recreation of the Abergynolwyn winding house.
Wagons could be shunted off onto a loop line behind and then across, and then they went down the incline over here into the village of Abergynolwyn, and there was a whole network of lines round the village up to the backyards and everything else.
So this is going to be a really interesting project to keep an eye on. After that, we boarded the train again and continued our journey. And having got to the other end, we watched as Dolgok ran round its train and coupled up, ready to work the return trip down. And once it was on the train, we hopped back aboard, ready for our return trip downhill towards Wharf. And I suppose around this point, I should probably tell you a bit more about the 75 appeal and what's going on.
Launching today is the start of the 75 appeal, which is to bring certain parts of the railway up to a new standard. The railway wants to be more accessible, it wants to be more inclusive and to have more interpretation to explain just why it's important. And that means there's going to be some fairly major changes, both here and at Pendre. Because as much as we all love how this place looks, there are rooms for improvement. The station has gone through many changes throughout the years, and today it hosts a good gift shop and a very good cafe who do an excellent breakfast. But the railway has now outgrown it in its current configuration and needs something that's more adaptable, with more space to be able to put on functions and to serve the railway. And so as part of this plan, there's going to be a massive redevelopment of this, a redevelopment of the site here to bring more undercover storage and more interpretation to explain why things here are important, and also converting the house behind us to bring it into accommodation for volunteers. People come from all over the world to volunteer on this railway, from all over the UK, but literally all over the world. And having nice accommodation for not just your odd volunteer like myself, but for families, because the railway has people who are grandparents, parents and children all volunteering together. So being able to come as a family and stay locally and just walk down and volunteer is an incredibly important part of this railway moving forward. And also a mind-numbingly obvious thing for a railway to have is accommodation right by it, so you can come from further afar and come and volunteer in the heart of Wales when you're not based in the heart of Wales. It's common sense really, and I can't believe that more railways don't follow this model. So taking the house behind us and making it for more people and making it accessible for people with additional needs to be able to stay and volunteer represents a very forward-thinking part of the railway's future. And Wharf isn't the only place that's going to be having mass redevelopment. To see the whole scope of the plan, we need to go up to Pendre,
which was coincidentally where number 1 was returning to. So we watched it as it manoeuvred around the loop in Wharf and prepared itself to travel up the main line and home. Bearing in mind this is still one of its first movements since it was reassembled following its overhaul, so it was a really exciting thing to see, and I cannot wait to see number 1 at the head of a train, particularly on those vintage carriages.
Pendre is the engineering heart of the railway. It hosts the engine shed, which is one of the most amazing structures. The atmosphere as you walk into the engine shed, where locomotives have been lit up for over 150 years. And then you walk a bit further into the bit that used to be a cottage, and then when the railway had more than 2 locomotives, they needed more space and knocked through into the cottage. Now, with all of these new plans of the redevelopment of here, they don't want to lose that wonderful atmosphere that generations have had and future generations will get to enjoy of walking into this magic shed. So the locos will still be stabled inside this shed, and that's not changing, because frankly that would be daft to change the most magic part of a railway. The facilities here have kept the railway running throughout its preservation history, and they have done a sterling job. They've kept the coaches undercover, they've allowed locomotives and stock to be painted, and most importantly, they've maintained and rebuilt almost every item on this railway. Looking forward to the future and what the railway wants to achieve over the next 75 years, some of these facilities have become quite literally life expired or are now becoming more restrictive. And part of the grand plan here is to expand all of this and bring it into the modern age and beyond. It involves, in various different plans, having viewing areas so people can come in and see the work. Better undercover storage for the coaches to keep them safe from the liquid sunshine that we get here in Wales. It means that there'll be a bigger and better workshop, allowing the guys here to do even more work in-house and look after the fleet of engines and stock. The workshop in here that has done so much good throughout the years is also going to look at being restored back to represent how it was in the earlier days and still remain an active workshop, but being a historical piece as well, with some of the modern and bigger pieces of plant being moved elsewhere into the new workshops. So that will still remain a workshop, but it will tie into the past and show the wonderful heritage of this railway and how the railway's managed to keep things going for years. And depending on what plan the railway goes forward with, you'll be able to access the workshop and get amongst the tools and see what it would have been like to be involved with the railway in those earlier years.
And with that said, let's take a closer look at the plans for the redevelopment of Pendre. There are 3 different ideas, from the least ambitious to the most ambitious, depending on the level of funding that the railway gets. So we'll start off by looking at option A, which is the least ambitious of the ideas, and all the others kind of build on from this initial plan. Plan A involves demolishing the existing mess and wash facilities and installing a visitor exhibition with other facilities in its place. The workshop would become a carriage repair area and a woodworking shop, with a heritage carriage display further on. On the other side of the site, a new mess room for volunteers would be constructed, as well as an engineering office. The existing carriage shed would be demolished and replaced with a new structure as a repair shed for running repairs and keeping things in service. There'd also be enough space to have a bogie workshop big enough to have a crane to be able to lift stock off its bogies for inspection. Beyond this shed, there would be a machine shop and a loco workshop for heavy repairs and overhauls. Beyond this, the existing paint shop would have its role expanded to be flexible storage as well as a paint shop, and then a new paint shop just beyond that would be constructed to allow locomotives and stock to be painted in its own dedicated place. Plan B follows on the same theme, but is a bit more complicated and sees a few more buildings being built and a bit more space being taken up. Like the previous plan, it sees the existing mess facilities being demolished to make a room for visitor exhibitions, although the workshop this time would become the heritage carriage viewing area, and the woodworking shop and the heritage workshop would be on the far end. It would also see one of the sheds becoming a carriage repair shop attached to this existing workshop. On the far side of the site, once again, we'd have a new mess room and washing facilities put, although this would be a 2-story building and have the engineering offices and the store and joinery workshop above it on the first floor. Moving down, we have a much bigger structure for the locomotive workshop, including a much bigger machine shop, with enough overhead clearance to accept both a crane and have an inspection pit. This would be one building in which both running repairs and heavy repairs and full overhauls could be undertaken. Going to the south of the site, there are 2 options. Option 2 is the same as Plan A, but Option 1 involves laying track and a new building in the so-called orchard for a dedicated paint shop. And as part of this plan and Plan A as well, there would be a dedicated carriage shed to be constructed at Talyllyn. And finally, on to Option C, which is my personal favourite plan and by far the most ambitious. But if you're going to take on a project like this, you might as well go big. Like the other plans, this sees the existing mess and wash facilities being demolished to be replaced with a visitor exhibition room with toilets and drinks facilities, which is more than the previous plans. The workshop will become a heritage workshop and carriage exhibit space running the entirety of this and the other sheds, which will also double as the heritage carriage storage, which means that all of the heritage vehicles will be displayed in this area. On the other side of the site, like Plan B, there will be a double-storey mess room with wash facilities, with the upper storey having the engineering office, stores and joinery workshop. This plan has a significantly bigger machine shop with the stores being moved elsewhere, and a much bigger locomotive workshop for running repairs in a brand new building where there was once a carriage shed. And like Plan B, there would be a public viewing area inside the workshop so people could see what was going on and see locomotives under overhaul. Moving to the south of the site, the existing paint shop would become additional carriage storage, giving room for a few more vehicles to be stored. Across from that, in the orchard, would see a major redevelopment, including a stores area, which would allow the workshop to be bigger, and a carriage shed with a full-length pit for inspections, and some of the heavier equipment, including a wheel lathe, a carriage scissor lifts, and a wheel drop and bogie exchange, with the woodworking shop attached to this. Which makes total sense because you're going to be doing most of your woodworking maintaining your carriages. There would also be, as option 1 on Plan B, be a dedicated paint shop next door to this. Now, this whole area makes complete sense because you have all your carriage facilities in one place. You can do repairs, you can do restoration, and then you can paint it all within one area. It's worth pointing out before we get too excited that all of the plans that we've seen in this video are still at the concept stage, so not all details are final and things may change before the thing is actually constructed.
So the big question is, having talked about the redevelopments here and the possible plans of what exactly is the 75 appeal? Well, that's how you guys can get involved and help secure the future for the Tal-y-llyn. This place has been the cornerstone of preservation, and it's so good to see a society being so forward-thinking of what they need to do to ensure that the legacy of this place will continue. The 75 appeal means that you can either join up and make a one-off donation or become a regular donor as part of the 75 Club and help make this into reality. The plan is to apply for Heritage Lottery funding and other grants and then match fund that amount. However, if this doesn't happen, the project is still going to go ahead, albeit maybe a little bit slower. This is certainly the future the railway is planning on, and to be involved in it and to help shape the future of this is an opportunity that is honestly not to be missed, because to be able to say that you helped secure the future of this and were being part of the Talyllyn is truly something special. So there's links over in the video description so you can see how you can get involved and become part of the railway's future. Become part of the birthplace of railway preservation. Become part of the railway with a heart of gold. And with that, thank you all very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this, how about clicking somewhere over there for one of my adventures here at the Talyllyn, or down there for one of my adventures here at the Talyllyn. And of course, thank you to the railway for inviting me along to be part of this launch. It's something truly exciting, and I really hope that other railways learn from this and they too plan for the future and safeguard it for the next generations to be able to enjoy. Thanks guys, we'll see you next time. Ta-ra.